Welcome to our event tonight. I'm so glad you're here. The most important thing for me to tell you is really rather sad for me to tell you is, we have a member of the church who has deanimated. Saul Kent deanimated and is in cryostasis. We obviously want to tell you a little bit about Saul Kent. Some of you may not know who he is. Saul Kent is actually the man who got me to stop procrastinating and sign up with Alcor. Saul Kent is the co-founder of the Church of Perpetual Life and Bill's longtime partner. We have a video now.
Why is death so bad?
Because it's the end of life. Death is not the second worst thing that can happen to you, it's the worst thing that can happen to you. It's not even a question of death is bad. Bad or good isn't the issue. You're just not there. It's the disappearance of everything. There's nothing I can imagine worse than that. Being dead to me means not being forever. People tell me they're not afraid to die. I ask them, if I put a loaded gun at your head and threaten to pull the trigger, will you be afraid? And they say, yes. Well, then you're afraid to die. I hear people all the time that say, well, I'm not really afraid of dying. What I'm afraid is growing old. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Growing old is the process by which you die. Around the age of 24 or 25, I came across an article in Playboy magazine, June of 1964, called Intimations of Immortality. It talked about various ways in which aging would be controlled in the future and how lifespans would be extended. And it had one small paragraph, for those of you who can't wait, we have something for you as well. And he mentioned a book called The Prospect of Immortality by Robert C.W. Ettinger. They talked about what was then just called freezing people. The word cryonics hadn't been invented yet. I ran off to the beach, which is where I used to spend a lot of my time in those days, and I read the book, and that got me involved in actually doing something about aging and death. I was among the people who started the first cryonics organization in August 1965. We were involved in several of the early freezings. It's one thing to talk about freezing people, it's another thing to actually do it. The word cryonics comes from a fellow named Carl Werner who was working with us in New York. He just made it up, and about 5 years later it was in the dictionary. The idea is to take a person at the point that he or she is dying and to lower their body temperature down to the temperature of, say, liquid nitrogen, which is minus 320 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. You take out the person's blood and you replace it with a chemical solution that protects against freezing damage, sort of an antifreeze. The final stage is you put them into something which is a lot like a thermos bottle, except it's about 8 feet high. That person would go through a form of time travel, and perhaps 100 years from now, perhaps 200 years from now, perhaps 300 years from now, medicine would advance to the point where the person could be thawed, the damage repaired, and the person brought back to life. This appealed to me as a means of possibly avoiding death should I be faced with it, but I also saw it as a means of publicizing and promoting the idea of extending lifespan. My objective was not to be frozen and come back. What I really wanted to do was not to die at all. My mother's reaction when I got involved in cryonics was interesting. She saw it as being impractical in terms of a career. She was always concerned about you have to get a real job in the real world and make money. One of the early freezings I was involved in, there was a woman dying at New York University Hospital, and at the time I was living with my mother in the Bronx. I was eating supper, and I got a call that there was an emergency, and I had to get down there. And I was about to go, and she says, "Finish your pears." You know, I was in the middle of eating dessert. My mother was around 40 years of age when I was born, so she was older than most mothers. And I was an only child. My father died when I was 10 months old, and of course I don't recall it at all. And my mother never remarried, so I never really had a father. He died of rheumatic heart disease, which is essentially an infection that attacks the heart. And that is readily curable and preventable now. People don't die of rheumatic heart disease anymore. If my father had been frozen, he easily could have been cured of rheumatic heart disease even now, or even maybe a year or so after he died. My mother was both mother and father to me, and she was very devoted to me. She brought me up by herself. She stayed in the house and worked as a dressmaker at home. It wasn't until I was about 14 or 15 before she went out and got a job. When I first got involved in the 60s, I had made legal and financial preparations to be frozen. But my mother never did at that point. It isn't that she wasn't interested, it's that we really couldn't afford it. She was already getting on in years, and it's more expensive to get life insurance, which is the way in which most people pay for this procedure. Incidentally, this is truly life insurance. When people sell you life insurance now, it's really death insurance. It's someone else's life that benefits, not yours. This is true life insurance. This is meant to be for you and no one else. In later years, when she went into her 70s, I got a call at about 2 in the morning. The nurse said my mother had almost died a few minutes ago and she was desperately trying to revive her. I decided to have her brought directly into the facility at which she was going to be frozen. That was the mistake in terms of dealing with the authorities. The people who pronounced her dead really were qualified to do so, but the problem was it was seen as a conflict of interest. The people who were freezing her were also the people who were pronouncing her dead. My mother was a neuro patient. I had chosen to have essentially just her brain frozen because her body was really in bad shape. She was very frail and she had all kinds of problems. The reason we freeze the entire head is that the skull protects the brain. If you had to dissect the brain out, it would be worse. It's better to do it within the head. Now, this is done about 12 hours normally after the freezing process is started. And this is what was done in my mother's case. Her head was separated from her body surgically, but 12 hours after the process started and 12 hours after she was pronounced dead. And of course, 4 years and 12 hours after she really began to die. And the next morning, there's a knock on the door about noon, and it's a camera crew. "Can we have some of your comments about the story that appeared in the Riverside paper?" And I said, "Sure, what is this all about?" He asked if I'd seen the story. I said, "No." It said, although Dora Kent died of pneumonia, coroners are looking into the possibility that she was still alive when her head was removed. Within the hour, there were crews that came to my house. There were crews that came to the facility where she was being stored. There were crews that showed up at the coroner's office. It was a 3-ring circus, or probably a 4-ring circus. There were many rings in the circus.
The administrator, Mike Darwin, who participated in the removal of Mrs. Kent's head, said there were a number of people in the operating room who would confirm she was clinically dead.
We're not stupid. We're not that stupid. I admit we've made some errors in judgment that I wish we hadn't made. But we are not foolish enough to start this procedure before someone is in full cardiac and respiratory arrest.
I get a call from someone at the facility, and he says, they're here. They've got the police, they've got, I don't know, fire engines, everything in the world, and they're there with a search warrant to autopsy my mother's brain. Except for one problem, it wasn't there.
The frozen head of 83-year-old Dora Kent is missing. It had been stored here at the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, but after the Riverside County Coroner's Office began an investigation into her death, the head vanished. In the meantime, the questions remain. Who has Dora Kent's head, and how did she die?
They were furious, and they started threatening all kinds of things, threatening to defrost all the patients, threatening to throw people in jail. Nobody knew where my mother was. She was safe and she was secure, but she was not there. They were talking about doing all this investigating, but they weren't doing a damn thing. They were just posturing, flailing their arms about and, playing cops and robbers. Was operating out of a couple of motels near Ontario Airport. A motel got 2 phones in there, was constantly on the phone. Only a few people knew where I was. They were after me and some of the other people like mad. That 17 days, I and some other people and the attorneys were working nonstop, continuously, to get the documentation. We wanted expert witnesses, doctors, lawyers, and so forth. We needed legal arguments, case law, all kinds of things in an unprecedented situation.
Saul, I know you haven't really talked about this, but I really, really want to know, where was the head during all of this time?
I really don't want to comment on that. It was at a private person's residence. It was not at mine. A private person was maintaining it in their residence. That's where it was.
What do you mean a private person is maintaining?
A residence. Someone took it home.
A Riverside lab that freezes human remains for future resuscitation won a victory in court today. A judge issued a preliminary injunction forbidding the county coroner from thawing and examining the cryonically frozen head of Dora Kent. The whereabouts of Dora Kent's head are unknown, but it is believed that her son has hidden it somewhere.
It was a matter of face. These authorities had put themselves in a position where they had made these public statements saying that there had been grand theft, that there had been murder. The truth is they never charged anybody with anything, not even a speeding ticket. You have the health police, you have the Food and Drug Administration. They have rules, they have regulations. We break all of them. They hate us with complete disregard for whether we're doing anybody any good or not, because the fact that we're saving lives is totally irrelevant to them. We're challenging their authority, and they're going to put their foot down, and they're going to... It's essentially a war which will either end in us being put out of business and perhaps in prison, or will lead to radical changes in government. I'm betting on the second.
Our guest is Saul Kent, the son of Dora Kent. He runs the Life Extension Foundation.
Hello, Larry. Welcome back.
Thank you.
This guy is a nut. I want to know something.
He's not. Hold it. Don't demean the guest. Just ask the question.
Why didn't he freeze everything? Why just the head?
Well, because she was extremely elderly. She had atherosclerosis. She had osteoporosis, and I thought she needed a new body, which the future will bring.
You can say, well, someone is 80 and they're coming back in the body of a 20-year-old, but actually it's going to be far better than that. In the future, you will come back in the body that's far better than any 20-year-old is today. It goes beyond the idea of the Superman. All Superman suggests is superpowers, but the same as we have now. We're going to have powers far beyond that. Identity is going to be one of the major subjects, both in terms of study and in terms of practical implications. The question of who you are, who you want to be, who you're becoming, and who you want to end up as, or whether you want to end up as anyone. In the future, people may have more than one body. Your brain necessarily wouldn't have to be in your body. You aren't your body. You are your feelings about yourself, your feelings about other people. That's your essence. And if that could be transferred into another body, it would still be you. I mean, you might wake up and say, wow, I'm real different today. This is pretty hard to comprehend, but these kinds of things are going to be possible. I think everyone has the right to be dead forever. I think it's an inalienable right, guaranteed by the Constitution and whatever else. Not only would we have the entire past to discuss, but we'd have potentially an illimitable future. Those of us who survive the transition will remember what it was like to grow old and die and to have traditional relationships between parents, between lovers, between friends. It's all going to be very different. People who grow up to be immortal will not be able to really understand a lot of what we understand because we remember the way it was. There are people who would like to go back 100 years in the past and live in the past. They don't realize that things were really much more horrible than the way you see in the past on television. The good old days were not good. And although it's far better now than it was today, the fact is that we're moving towards far better times.
If in the future you meet your mom again, what would be the first thing you'd like to say to her, you imagine yourself saying to her?
I'd say, Mom, we're now in paradise together and we're going to try for the next form of paradise. I'd say it worked.
By the way, where is your mother now?
I'd rather not comment about that. Just rather not. Maybe in 100 years.
Saul, we miss you and we look forward to seeing you again after your reanimation. For those of you that are cryonicists, you may want to join us in December when we have our Remembrance of the Resurrectables ceremony. It's a cryonic ceremony where we show the photos and a short biography of people who are also cryopreserved. This is not for every person who is in stasis, but only for those people who are public about being cryonically suspended. For me, cryonics is a way for someone today to take an ambulance into the future, to a time that they can be reanimated and cured of whatever ailment it was that killed them, essentially. Death is, 50 years ago, if you had a heart attack, you died. That was it. There was no way to bring you back. But now we have ways to bring people back from things that would have killed you for sure, even just 20 years ago. As technology progresses, so does our chance to live a long, long life. Here at Perpetual Life, we refer to ourselves as immortalists. It's not because we have attained immortality at this moment, but we see it in the future. We see the ability to live a long, extended life. 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years is not enough. To be 1,000 years old and beyond is our goal. So for me, cryonics is a type of life insurance. But still, at Perpetual Life, we are focused on age reversal and extreme longevity. So I look at age reversal as being plan A, cryonics as being plan B. It was Saul Kent that I was a procrastinator. Some people call us cryocrastinators, where we put off the signing up for cryonics. It was a conversation I had with Saul that finally got me to realize I need to be signed up and signed up with either Alcor or Cryonics Institute or one of the many organizations around the world who offer cryonic suspension. If you are interested in cryonics, you can join us. You can contact me. You can reach out to me at the Church of Perpetual Life, send me an email, and I'll get you information on this because really it's quite important. We now have something coming up in September that's also quite important, and that's the RADFest, the Revolution Against Aging and Death, the festival where hundreds and perhaps thousands of people can come together and meet. This year it's in Anaheim, California, September 7th, and I have a short video to share with you on the Revolution Against Aging and Death Festival, the RADFest.
Good to see you, man. You look great. I gotta tell you. Some of you may remember the controversies about nuclear transfer, especially with human cells. And
to make it simple this is data from the National Library of Medicine, 2013.
Great, okay, so if this sounds expensive, it's because no charge, and I also do it in exchange for community service hours. For people who are not quite below.
Injections every 3 to 6 months, so we can do that much more frequently. When you do regular treatments, you can really make a huge...
Again, it's like colonics. You repair, you take away the good bacteria, you take away the bad bacteria, but you also take away the good bacteria when you do a colon therapy. So the...
It's probably getting better or worse over the last 20 years. There we go. Ha! And ha! Little more volume. Ha! And then we're just going to move down and up a little bit. Ha! And up. And if you want to...
That's the RadFest. If you're interested in more information, simply go to radfest.com or again, contact me. RadFest is an amazing, wonderful, fantastic event. If you have not gone, you have missed out. The speaker tonight, in fact, I met him originally at the very first Rad Festival, and that was just after he published his book, Death is Wrong. We have a copy of Death is Wrong in our library here at Perpetual Life. Gennady Stolyarov II. Gennady is the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, advocating for science, health, and technology in American politics. He is an actuary, essayist, novelist, poet, mathematician, composer, and editor-in-chief of the Rational Argumentator. Mr. Stolyarov hosts the Virtual Enlightenment Salons and is a member of the board of directors of the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. Gennady authored Death is Wrong, the children's book on life extension, as I mentioned, and is the chief executive of the Nevada Transhumanist Party. Mr. Stolyarov holds various professional insurance designations and is the author of numerous actuarial study guides. Let's welcome now to Perpetual Life, Mr. Gennady Stolyarov II.
Thank you very much, Neal, for that introduction. And it is an honor to join everyone at the Church of Perpetual Life, as well as people watching throughout the world today. And I'm thrilled to present to you on the topic of choosing a transhumanist future. So this is an important subject because I think sometimes the main goals that we seek to pursue are at risk of becoming overlooked as our movement grows. And it's important to keep in mind the vision of people like Saul Kent, who quite eloquently expressed many of the themes and many of the aspirations that I will discuss today. And indeed, I think it is quite a fortuitous occasion that the video of Saul Kent preceded my presentation today, because I do hold that he exemplifies the spirit of transhumanism and the ideals of transhumanism, which I hope to convince those who aren't convinced already to embrace, because it is an active choice. And there are some pitfalls along the way that we need to overcome in order to achieve this future, in order to achieve this next paradigm of our civilization. And I will argue that steadfastness of purpose is a key quality that we all need to have when choosing and advocating for this future. For those of you who are interested in learning more about the work of the organizations that I'm representing today, the Transhumanist Party and the Transhuman Club, please go to transhumanist-party.org or transhuman.club. You do not have to be interested in politics in order to derive value from our work. The Transhumanist Party does engage in certain political activities, but the Transhuman Club is entirely apolitical. It is about promoting the vision of transhumanism. But if we're talking about transhumanism, I think it's fitting to discuss what transhumanism is. And there are various definitions out there on transhumanism. They have some variations, they have some nuances. I highlighted 3 slightly varying definitions. 2 of them are from Wikipedia at different points in time, 2016 and 2023. And the 3rd definition is the one that is used by Tom Ross. Tom Ross is the U.S. Transhumanist Party's 2024 U.S. presidential candidate. So he has created these excellent graphics about transhumanism and about key other terms that are associated with our movement. The 2016 Wikipedia definition is one that I like because it speaks to the breadth of the aspirations of transhumanism. It states that transhumanism is an international and intellectual movement that aims to transform the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capabilities. The 2023 version has a slight variation off of that. It discusses these technologies greatly enhancing longevity and cognition. It also acknowledges that transhumanism is a philosophical movement. There's a rich philosophical tradition underlying it. And the Tom Ross definition also acknowledges this aspect of transhumanism as a philosophical movement focused on the enhancement of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies able to greatly enhance longevity, mood, and cognitive abilities. So this is an extremely ambitious vision of the future. It essentially states that the limitations that are imposed upon us by our biological evolution do not need to remain the case, that we can essentially take charge of the future trajectory of our species, of our biological organisms, of our minds, of our resources, of our technologies, and make something better out of them. Now, transhumanism, as I pointed out, has many eloquent historical advocates. And the term transhumanism, it has appeared in various forms, even as early as Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy in the early 14th century, where he used the term transhumanare in Italian. But Julian Huxley described transhumanism quite famously in 1957. And this is an excerpt that I think is quite fitting in terms of showcasing the aspirations of transhumanism. Huxley writes, "Up until now, human life has generally been, as Hobbes described it, nasty, brutish, and short. The great majority of human beings, if they have not already died young, have been afflicted with misery. We can justifiably hold the belief that these lands of possibility exist, and that the present limitations and miserable frustrations of our existence could be in large measure surmounted. The human species can, if it wishes, transcend itself, not just sporadically, an individual here in one way, an individual there in another way, but in its entirety as humanity." So this was a remarkable articulation of the idea that our entire human species can overcome these age-old limitations. Now, Julian Huxley used the term transhumanism. This was one of his many endeavors. He was the Secretary General of UNESCO, quite a prominent futurist and techno-optimist in his own right. But in terms of an organized philosophical movement of transhumanism, we saw that emerge later in the 1980s and early 1990s. And the leading philosopher of a type of transhumanism called extropianism is Max More. He's still quite intellectually active. You can find his Substack blog. And he wrote in 1990 that transhumanism is a class of philosophies, so there could be some variation within this big tent of transhumanism, that seek to guide us toward a post-human condition. Transhumanism shares many elements of humanism, including a respect for reason and science, a commitment to progress, and a valuing of human and post-human and transhuman existence in this life. Transhumanism differs from humanism in recognizing and anticipating the radical alterations in the nature and possibilities of our lives resulting from various sciences and technologies. So transhumanism is a logical continuation of humanism, but it goes beyond humanism. Humanism concerns itself perhaps with some of the more typical means of improving human life, or showing respect for the human being, for the rights of the individual. But transhumanism adds this dimension of radical scientific progress that can lead to radical alterations in the nature of human beings. And the Transhumanist Declaration, of which there have been several versions, stated in its 1999 version in Article 1, humanity will be radically changed by technology in the future. We foresee the feasibility of redesigning the human condition, including such parameters as the inevitability of aging, limitations on human and artificial intellects, unchosen psychology, suffering, and our confinement to the planet Earth. Again, an extremely ambitious and techno-optimistic vision. So the core message of transhumanism, if we can distill it from the statements that we examined, is that through science, technology, and reason, we can push back and remove the obstacles that have plagued the human condition. Those include involuntary death, diseases, poverty, scarcity of basic needs, war, pollution, tribalism, cognitive biases, mob behaviors, all of the perils, all of the suboptimalities that characterize the current turbulent times we live in and many past periods of history can be overcome through science, technology, and reason. And fundamentally, transhumanism is about making life better in every respect that we can through science, technology, and reason. And furthermore, transhumanism is a big tent. There's not one dogma of transhumanism that you must adhere to or else. Transhumanism admits many different approaches toward pursuing these goals. And in the US Transhumanist Party, we have members who span the entire conventional political spectrum, as well as many who have unconventional political views, many who are apolitical, and they all care about overcoming these problems that are listed. Sometimes they may disagree about the means to get there. There are some libertarian transhumanists, there are some socialist transhumanists, there are some centrist transhumanists, for example. But because they share these goals, it's possible to have rational conversations. And the means are not fought over in the same intransigent way that they would be in mainstream politics or in mainstream discourse. Now, when I became chairman of the US Transhumanist Party in 2016, I thought, what were some key statements that could unite people in spite of, essentially, these differences about the means or differences in political orientation? And I articulated these three core ideals of the US Transhumanist Party, which, when members sign up for USTP membership, and this is completely free of charge, it's available to anyone throughout the world, they are shown these core ideals and they're asked, do they agree with these core ideals? So the first core ideal, I think this one is near and dear to everyone at the Church of Perpetual Life. The Transhumanist Party supports significant life extension achieved through the progress of science and technology. And we'll talk about significant life extension quite a bit more later on in this presentation. The second core ideal is that the Transhumanist Party supports a cultural, societal, and political atmosphere informed and animated by reason, science, and secular values. And the third core ideal is that the Transhumanist Party supports efforts to use science, technology, and rational discourse to reduce and eliminate various existential risks to the human species. So transhumanism is very much about individuals living much longer than they do today, but it's not just about that. It's also about improving our culture, our society, our political systems, so that rationality and the scientific method are at the core of decision-making, at how people approach the world, at how people strive toward the future of humanity. And likewise, we recognize that there are threats to the human species. Some threats are entirely, quote, natural, asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, for example. And other threats are man-made, for instance, nuclear weapons or biological weapons. And we need to be mindful of those threats. We need to use reason in order to avert them. So there are various technological approaches which we can harness in order to achieve this set of core ideals. Obviously, for life extension, we need progress in medicine, biotechnology, genetic engineering. Progress in nanotechnology would help as well, not just with medicine, but with a lot of other goals, with, for instance, creating different types of materials that would help improve human life, or cleaning up pollution. Artificial intelligence, of course, can be harnessed to solve a lot of complex problems that human minds are just not capable of grasping. We haven't evolved to grasp problems of that magnitude and complexity. And I think advances in artificial intelligence will be crucial in helping us arrive at radical life extension as well. For instance, AI can be used for drug discovery, narrowing down the targets for medicines that are then experimented upon in the lab, so that there are fewer false leads, so to speak. Space colonization is essential to prevent existential risk. As long as we're a single planet species, we are sitting ducks for any asteroid that might come along. Seasteading is the construction of floating modular platforms on the ocean floor that could enable jurisdictional experimentation as well as economic experimentation, experimentation with various forms of societal organization and production. Vertical farming would be excellent for increasing not just the food supply, but the ready availability of food so that it doesn't have to be transported over such long distances. Economical alternative energy is already coming to the forefront with more affordable solar energy, geothermal energy. Where I live in Nevada, it is a quite hospitable place for geothermal energy. Nuclear energy is becoming significantly safer. The next generation nuclear reactors, which can be built today, are essentially meltdown proof. Automation of production can lead to radical abundance for essentially everybody in the world so that there is no more poverty if enough automation is implemented and the fruits of that automation are distributed in a way that helps everybody. Autonomous and electric vehicles can both save on energy expenditures and they can save lives. More than 95% of accidents are due to human error. Flying cars can also be a great contribution to the transportation infrastructure of the future. Augmented reality could help people manage their health better or see other key statistics about whatever aspect of the world that they're interacting with. Encryption can help protect people's privacy. Technologies of the blockchain, including cryptocurrencies, smart contracts, DAOs, which are distributed autonomous organizations, can help people in terms of organizing economic activity in creative ways. There are actually already DAOs devoted to longevity. There's a longevity DAO, there's a cure DAO, for example. So this mode of organization has really taken off in recent years. And ectogenesis is the technology of essentially development of life in an artificial setting. So think about artificial wombs and the implications that they can have in terms of a safer method of creating new life and a method that can resolve a lot of thorny social issues as well. So given this suite of technologies that humankind can develop in the coming decades, let's go back to core ideal 1 of the US Transhumanist Party. What do we call the goal that we seek to attain? When many people in our movement would subscribe to some form of what core ideal 1 calls significant life extension, but different people will have different flavors and different degrees with which they would characterize it. So some people are very open about wanting to pursue immortality. They call themselves immortalists. They never want to die. And I never want to die either. Some people will say what they want to pursue is biological immortality, examples of which actually do exist in nature. And biological immortality doesn't mean invulnerability, so you could still get hit by a bus, you could still be killed in a natural disaster or in a war, but you wouldn't die from disease. You wouldn't die from biological aging or senescence. Of course, this is the Church of Perpetual Life. Some people say they want perpetual life. Again, they don't want to die. Indefinite life extension is a term that many people use, myself included. It means extending life without end. So we don't know whether or not we will eventually die. That may always be a contingency that we have to worry about, but we don't want to have a set expiration date. We don't want to have some fixed upper bound to our lifespans. Radical life extension means we want to live significantly longer to an extreme extent compared to today's lifespans. Some people will say significant life extension. It doesn't sound as radical, but it could in practice mean the same thing. Or life extension, so they want to live longer, or longevity. And you can talk about people today in their 90s or in their 100s who have exhibited a degree of longevity, or age reversal, essentially undoing some of the aspects of biological aging. Rejuvenation has a similar meaning. Some people talk about increased maximum lifespan, so trying to exceed today's supercentenarians at the outer limits. The current record holder is Jean Calment, who lived to be over 122 years, but still nobody has lived to be 123 years, and overcoming that limitation is going to be extremely important. Some people will say, therefore, increased lifespan. Some people will say, therefore, increased health span, which is the number of years in one's life that one spends in good health. And some people will say, therefore, healthy aging. I wonder, though, if that term is a bit too diluted. In the conventional sense, can there really be such a phenomenon as healthy aging, especially if we're looking at biological aging, which is essentially the systematic deterioration of the systems of the body? So if one means healthy aging in terms of becoming chronologically older, but staying in good health and not becoming biologically more senesced, I suppose the concept makes sense. But I think it's all too easy to imagine the conventional drug company ads of smiling senior citizens on the beach. And that's what a lot of people will think about when they see this term healthy aging. They might think, well, somebody is in their 70s or in their 80s and not suffering particularly yet, but maybe they're going to. And that's certainly insufficiently ambitious for most of us life extensionists and transhumanists. So I would state that none of those terms is inherently bad to use. And here I will part company with some people in our movement. I don't want to make any of those terms off limits. I actually think that what can stifle us is when somebody suggests that one should definitely not pursue one of those goals, because then that seems to shut down certain possibilities about what the future might be. And a commonplace example is actually found in press releases or public comments made by many scientists in the biogerontology community who say, well, we're engaged in this amazing research. It can help cure diseases. It can help reverse aspects of aging, but we're really not about lifespan. We're about health span. We're about this period of time that's spent in good health. And I think that kind of commentary sells these aspirations a bit short, because you really can't have increased health span without also having increased lifespan. As Dr. Aubrey de Grey likes to point out, when you achieve greater health, greater longevity is a side effect of that. And you also can't have increased lifespan without increased health span, because the diseases of old age, those are the ones that shorten lifespan. If people did not become exponentially more likely to get heart disease or cancer or diabetes or Alzheimer's disease as they became chronologically older, then their lifespans would be much longer. So health span and lifespan, in my view, go together. They should not be posited in opposition to one another. And furthermore, I think when people intentionally tone down their ambitions or what they think the ambitions of their movement should be, they're missing the fact that an ambitious vision can be inspiring and motivating. And again, this is why this organization is called the Church of Perpetual Life. If you called it the Church of Healthy Aging or the Church of Making Seniors 10% More Comfortable, I doubt that you would have as much of an audience, even though perhaps a greater share of the world's population would be somewhat fine with those names. They would say, okay, making seniors 10% more comfortable, that's not a bad goal. I don't think anybody would consider that a bad goal. But would it really rouse anybody to take the kinds of actions that are necessary to bring any of these visions to fruition by whatever name, even the vision of making 10% more comfortable the current senior population? So this has been an interesting dynamic that I have observed as our movement has grown, and it has certainly grown over the 19 years that I have been involved in it. I started in 2004 after I learned of Dr. Aubrey de Grey's SENS approach, Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence. And I remember how difficult it was to convince people in everyday life that these aspirations were worth taking seriously. But now, both transhumanism and longevity science are far more widely known than 2 decades ago. And we encounter references to our movement in media, in academia, even now to a certain extent in political discourse. Certainly there's a lot more media coverage of transhumanism. There are many more academic publications and books discussing it. New ones are coming out every several months. And of course, with the US Transhumanist Party, which was founded by Zoltan Istvan in 2014, transhumanists have made political forays, sometimes with much publicity. Longevity science has had a major influx of funding, to the extent that in some areas funding is no longer the main bottleneck. Research talent may be a greater bottleneck than funding, according to Aubrey de Grey, though, of course, funding is not sufficient for all organizations, and it certainly is not sufficient for all research that deserves funding. I know many notable scientists in the longevity field who could use many, many millions more dollars than they're getting right now. However, there is hope because there are more advocacy organizations, for instance, lifespan.io. There are more news organizations, for instance, Longevity Technology, that specifically cover this field. And there has been progress in research on various damage repair approaches. There are gene therapies now that are available to treat certain rare diseases. And of course, very famously, Liz Parrish, who was the 2020 US vice presidential candidate for the US Transhumanist Party, in 2015 became patient zero. She was the first person in the world to have a combination gene therapy tested on herself for the purpose explicitly of reversing biological aging. And with this success, with this publicity, there is interest and newcomers are attracted. And we want that. It's generally a beneficial phenomenon when newcomers enter our movement. But we do have to ask, are some of the newcomers attracted for the correct reasons? Are they there because they support the core goals of our movement? Or are they seeing perhaps some coattails to ride? Do they perhaps wish to redirect the movement somewhere else toward their pre-existing goals? Could somebody have a goal of, for instance, just really encouraging healthy living? And that's a perfectly fine goal. But could that person perhaps, if their motives are not entirely ethical, try to pivot the entire longevity field toward that and say, well, healthy living is the best you can do. And yes, you should engage in sound habits of diet and exercise. I think everybody will agree. But what if that person starts to say that's the only path toward healthy longevity? Then that starts to undermine what we're trying to do through the progress of science that would reverse the damage of aging. And it does appear to me some relative newcomers to the movement, including ones that have been able to achieve some prominence, wish to garner more mainstream acceptance by changing the message rather than by persuading the mainstream of the validity of the original message, the one that we all signed up for. And this approach has gained a name in recent years. Its advocates call it strategic conservatism. And I'm going to give you some examples of strategic conservatism. So there's an article, you can find it on the website of one Celine Haliwa. Celine Haliwa is the founder of a company called Loyal, and Loyal is trying to develop anti-aging drugs for dogs. Now, I think that's a really good goal, by the way. And I don't have any problem with pet longevity as a stepping stone toward human longevity. Certainly, of course, mouse longevity is a field that has been pursued to a great extent in our movement. And now LEVF, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, is undertaking the most ambitious mouse lifespan study in human history. You can look it up. It's the Robust Mouse Rejuvenation Study on levf.org. But Celine Haliwa has a very different view of how the longevity field or the anti-aging field, or what she calls the aging field, needs to present itself. And what I'm going to say here is not going to be anything personal about Celine Haliwa, though I do have a reason to be upset by something that she did a couple of years ago. What I'm going to say is purely in response to the ideas that she's articulating, because I really think we need to respond and refute those ideas. This is a fairly brief article. I've provided key excerpts from it. So what she says in her first paragraph is, the longevity field first reached prominence with claims of extremely long human lifespans and even immortality. While attention-grabbing, this has set the tone of aging drugs being controversial, debatable, even unethical. And she thinks it's a problem that this controversy exists. She'd rather that it not exist. And my response to this is, without these aspirations toward longer lifespans and overcoming the outer limits on lifespan, there will be significantly less motivation within our community to pursue anti-aging treatments. Yes, there might be controversy, but we should not fear debate. We should invite it and demonstrate the supremely ethical nature of our goals. If people allege that it's unethical to combat death and suffering, I would say it's supremely moral to do so. Then Celine writes, additionally, for aging drugs to pass over the many hurdles before market approval, the field needs to strategically match big pharma and regulatory conservatism. Aging drugs need to be framed in a way that fits the current frameworks and balances the risk-reward ratios that are of concern to the regulatory agencies, not try to blow them up. At these levels, change is slow and incremental. And just after reading this, I'm reminded of Saul Kent's revolt against the FDA and how he took a very different position. He challenged the institutions that stood in the way of scientific progress, indeed life-saving scientific progress that enabled Saul Kent to prolong his own life, even though what he did was not FDA approved. So my response to Celine's comments here is, we need institutional reform in addition to scientific progress. One does not get institutional reform by conforming to the current institutional gatekeepers. One gets institutional reform by advocating for change and for moving the Overton window, which is the window of possible ideas, possible measures, policies that the general public considers to be within the pale of reasonable discourse. And one can still work pragmatically within the system to get approvals. I'm not saying that people should stop seeking FDA approval or big pharma cooperation. If that is what it takes, then yes, that could be a means to an end. But one can still urge for the need for changes in the system. One doesn't just say, everything is fine the way it is right now, and we're going to pretend that we're just like these institutional gatekeepers in the hopes that maybe, possibly, they will let a little thing through their approval process. Then Celine writes, while the ethical debates may be prudent in the future, we are extremely far from these debates being relevant. Inducing them now with irrational rhetoric only hurts the chances of having any aging drugs at all. And this is where I completely disagree with her views on the time frame. The ethical debates are already happening anyway. And Celine may be a bit too young to remember President George W. Bush's Commission on Bioethics in the mid-2000s. But there were people on that commission, like Leon Kass, for instance, who were already saying it's not ethical to essentially progress in medicine and in longevity science to the extent of significantly increasing lifespans beyond what they currently are right now. And these kinds of philosophical opponents of progress and longevity can already see through any rhetoric or euphemisms, and they will still critique anybody who wishes to develop anti-aging treatments. These people are opposed to our goals, but they're not easily fooled. If somebody starts talking about this great drug that will facilitate healthy aging and uses the most innocuous rhetoric, they'll still see right through it. They are smart people, and we cannot underestimate them by thinking that a certain combination of words or syllables is somehow going to change their outlook. It is better to be forthright and engage in the inevitable debates and make one's case and win. And it also, to a great extent, actually respects one's opponents much more, because then we can speak directly to their concerns, not try to tiptoe around them. And of course, transhumanism as a movement does encounter its own challenges. Name recognition is one of them, and I have held and have articulated for many years, transhumanism is the best term for our philosophy and movement. There is more recognition of it now, but there are still many people whom I come across where if they aren't familiar with our community, their initial response is simply, what is transhumanism? Tell me more about it. So I think a lot of people in our movement, they tend to assume a lot more context in the minds of other people that other people don't have. And that's a common human fallacy. We all seem to be inclined to attribute to other people the same kind of knowledge, background, experiences that we ourselves have. But in reality, for a lot of people, the initial reaction is just, what is this? There's not a widespread hostile reception of the term, except perhaps in certain more alt-right aligned, more conspiracy theorist aligned circles. And what we need to do is more overtly explain what transhumanism is, advocate for it, so that people see more instances of it. People tend to essentially remember what they hear or see or encounter many times over and over again. And the first time they see it, they might gloss over it, or they might not remember somebody mentioning the term transhumanism. But by the 11th or 12th time, I'm sure they will remember it. And if some people think, well, this term transhumanism, we haven't essentially captured the hearts and minds of the entire world with it yet, so we need to use some other term, I would say rebranding is counterproductive, especially if the rebranding is motivated by the desire to prevent certain misrepresentations. Like some people are worried that if we use any term with the prefix trans in it, we'll be associated with the transgender movement. By the way, this is not a critique of the transgender movement, and there are some notable transgender transhumanists, but transhumanism is not the same as transgenderism. So we can't let the ignorant define what transhumanism means. It would be like saying, well, we need to rename the Transcontinental Railroad that was finished in 1869 because we don't want people to think that only transgender people built that railroad or rode on that railroad. And we shouldn't be using the term transform because people might think that means to change gender. Or we shouldn't be using any references to anything transcendental because people might think that has something to do with gender. Well, the prefix trans is a Latin prefix that occurs in many words, and it has multiple possible meanings. It could mean beyond, or it could mean through. So think of the Transcontinental Railroad as going through the continent. And transhumanism really can encapsulate both of those meanings. So we're beyond the limitations of humanity, but it is through our humanity, through all the good things about being human, that we achieve those goals. And we do have some challenges because the major media and the alt-right conspiracy media both often ignore respectable transhumanists, and they focus on sensationalism, they focus on intentional misrepresentation of transhumanism in order to foment scandal. So I think this is just an outgrowth of the mentality of if it bleeds, it leads. And this is why it's important for us to create our own media. It's important for us to have independent sources, independent voices for our message, so that we're not entirely beholden on these kinds of misrepresentations. And it's also important to note, effective strategies for raising awareness are all time-consuming and labor-intensive. Nothing works quite as well as one-to-one interaction, because then you can speak directly to a person's ideas, to maybe any reservations that that person has, and create a dialogue that continues going forward. But of course, we're all constrained by the scale of that kind of approach. We need many more individuals who are willing to spend time to accurately convey the ideas and aspirations of transhumanism to as many people as possible. So we need to train more effective advocates. Another challenge for our transhumanist movement is entryism. So whenever a movement becomes prominent or attractive, there are some who want to seize it, to redirect it, and sometimes for less than salutary purposes. So there have been cases of non-transhumanists who were motivated by ideology or by desire for attention, including people who are plainly just online trolls who sought to capture transhumanist organizations for their own agendas. However, there is, I think, a hopeful insight to be derived from such observations, because entryism means we have a valuable enough platform that they want to take it over. If we didn't have something of value in these ideas in this movement, then they would not want to have anything to do with it. But it is essential to have robust internal protocols to vet people who aspire towards positions of prominence. And this is not as important for, say, rank and file members of an organization or an audience. People can have many diverse backgrounds, and some people might be struggling in their lives. Some people might not always be on their best behavior. But when we look at people who are spokespersons, people in positions of leadership, people in positions of responsibility, we need to consider what makes people reliable, what makes people trustworthy, what gives us confidence that these people represent the ideas that we hold dear. And one important benchmark is, does this person have an extensive online presence that documents years of work done to advance initiatives aligned with our movement? Actions speak louder than words. If somebody comes significantly, quickly, seemingly out of nowhere, then there is some caution that's warranted. That's not to say that person should be dismissed, but we need to accumulate significant information over time. Give that person an opportunity to collaborate with us, to show an affinity to our ideas, to show essentially where their motives lie. Focusing on a person's history, character, commitment to the core goals of the movement. That is all crucial. And we've had enough time in this movement since the late 1980s, early 1990s. Some of us are younger. I entered the movement in 2004, but there has been enough time to gather this information and figure this out, and also to essentially have processes where people who are well known within the movement work with newcomers and help them establish this history, this reputation, and evidence of commitment. So I have often been fond of William Lloyd Garrison, an early 19th century abolitionist in the United States whose advocacy helped to a significant extent to end slavery. But in the 1830s, William Lloyd Garrison was asked, well, isn't it unrealistic to talk about the immediate abolition of slavery? Shouldn't we formulate some sort of plan to gradually free all of the slaves? And he responded as follows: urge immediate abolition as earnestly as we may, it will alas be gradual abolition in the end. We have never said that slavery would be overthrown by a single blow. That it ought to be, we shall always contend. So he acknowledged the practical reality here. The fact is, we're not all going to be biologically immortal tomorrow. I want to be. I want to be biologically immortal yesterday, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I hosted in February of this year a fascinating virtual enlightenment salon with Carl Carlisle, who is still a longevity activist. He was an early longevity activist starting in the 1960s, and he took part in what was called Project 1989, which, if it had succeeded by the time I was 2 years old, would have set us firmly on the path toward reversing biological aging. I believe that should have happened. And I think being of the mindset that we should end this curse of involuntary death as soon as possible is the correct way to go, because there will be obstacles in the way. We will have gradual abolition of death in the end, but we need to urge this abolition to happen as soon as possible. So here's another advocate of steadfastness of purpose, Sir Winston Churchill. And he said this in the midst of World War II. Never give in, never give in. Never, 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 and nothing, great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And I think when we translate this statement to our time and our challenge, I don't see any human being as an enemy. I am with Jim Stroll on this, who says that our enemy is aging and death, not one another. But it does seem at times that this enemy has overwhelming might, and it definitely imposes the most colossal force that anything can upon us. We are all subject to it, but we must never yield to it. We must never relinquish the objective of defeating this enemy. So when it comes to steadfastness of purpose, the good news is we mostly need to keep doing what we have been doing more consistently, more persistently, and at scale. And mostly to achieve this, we need more advocates who have strong work ethic, accurate understandings of our movement, and willingness to learn. And I know there are many great advocates among you in the audience today. If you don't consider yourself to be one of those yet, but you want to be, I hope that I've inspired you. And I hope that I have given you a sufficiently pure distillation of this vision that you will actually want to carry it forward. That you won't just say, oh, that's nice, like making seniors 10% more comfortable is nice. But there's a reason why I included these images, which were generated using the aid of AI by my good friend and U.S. Transhumanist Party officer Jason Geringer, of future worlds. These are possible worlds that you and I might one day live in and explore if we achieve these goals. And wouldn't it be fascinating to explore any one of these worlds, whichever ones you prefer, or an indefinite plethora of other possible worlds? But to get there, we don't need to rebrand or use bland names. We don't need to worry about ignorant people thinking that the prefix trans could only refer to transgenderism. We don't need to fear controversy and debate like the strategic conservatives do, as long as we adhere to our principles and behave with impeccable integrity. We don't need to tone down our ambitions in order to satisfy institutional gatekeepers. And I want to refer you to an initiative that I think really brings out the best in our movement. This is our 2024 US presidential campaign with our presidential candidate, Tom Ross, and our vice presidential candidate, Daniel Tweed. You can look at the campaign web pages that we have deployed, and you can see here some of the art and graphic design that has emerged from this campaign already, discussing the United States Transhumanist Party, how we value focusing on policy rather than politics as conventionally defined, and initiatives and reforms that will improve the human condition for as many people as possible. This is a transpartisan campaign, so we're about advancing common ground. We really think that although our vision of the future is radical, it is one that every reasonable person can actually find an affinity to. And Tom Ross often talks about putting the human into transhumanism. Transhumanism really is about making the best of our humanity and perpetuating our humanity instead of falling victim to death and decay and to the evolved flaws of our own minds and our own societal systems. And then I want to encourage us all to try to live to see a much brighter future. These are some AI-generated variations, again, by my friend Jason Geringer, of a painting that I commissioned from Ekaterina Valinakova in 2017 called The City of New Anti-Death. So the idea is this is a city in a future time when all of these great perils of the human condition that I mentioned previously have been overcome. And instead, human beings get to live lives of unlimited abundance, duration, and potential, and enjoy these kinds of cityscapes and many other possibilities as well. So my closing thought for today is we are actually on the right track toward the future we wish to create. We mainly need to persevere, redouble our efforts, amplify our resources, and make sure that we are not steered away from that right track. And hopefully I've illustrated some of the possible pitfalls for you today. But I would encourage you to join us. It is absolutely free at transhumanist-party.org/membership, or join the Transhuman Club. Whether or not you're political, the Transhuman Club is about art, it's about networking, it's about education, it's about discussing science. And I would be happy to speak to a greater extent about anything that I discussed today or any related subjects. Please feel free to ask any questions. And again, I extend my profound appreciation to the Church of Perpetual Life for having this venue and for enabling me to deliver what I think are some really important thoughts about the state of our movement and where it needs to go from here.
Okay. Wonderful, Gennady. Thank you so much. What a great presentation. You know, we're really lucky to have you tonight and to be certainly the leader of the Transhumanist Party and the transhumanist movements. You've done so much that so many people don't even know about. Really tremendous presentation. Thank you. We do have a couple of questions, but first I'd like to state that, you know, we had the presidential candidate in 2016 come and speak at Perpetual Life. And one of the tenets at Perpetual Life is that we never advocate any political position, whether it be libertarian or transhumanist, whether it be Democratic or Republican. I want to make an exception with the Transhumanist Party, but I fear that may set a precedent in a bad order. The fact that I am the fact that I actually voted in 2016 as a write-in candidate for the Transhumanist Party has really no bearing on the fact that we are a non-political church, and we remain such. But all of the things you are doing are so important, and I only can urge you to continue doing all that you are working on. We have a question here, and I'm going to bring it up. As we are a science-affirming party, what % of governance hard power might be substituted by the soft power achievable through community science initiatives? That's a question coming from Daniel.
Yes, and thank you, Daniel, for that question. I think you and I are very much aligned in the premise of that question, and that in any sphere of human activity that we possibly can, we should replace force and coercion with voluntary interactions. It's a lot easier to get good results if we can get people to agree that those results are worthy of pursuit. One statement that I've often made is, if you want someone to get up from a chair, you can potentially, with enough time, engineer a device that predicts the exact molecular configuration of that person's body and exerts the exact amount of leverage that's needed to eject them from that chair, whether they want to or not. Or you could just kindly ask them to get out of that chair, which is more effective. But I do think there's a role for science and technology in incentivizing these kinds of voluntary solutions, primarily because I think the evolved suboptimalities of the human mind often lead people to drift toward coercion as the first recourse. And we need to show people that there are so many better ways. The progress of our civilization has been about showing people that. Steven Pinker has an excellent book. It was published in 2011 called The Better Angels of Our Nature, where he documented how the prevalence of violence and various other ills declined significantly, of course, in proportional terms over time. So even the world wars, which were tremendously violent on a proportional scale, killed fewer people relative to the total population of the world at the time than a typical tribal skirmish, which could kill perhaps 50% of the population of each tribe. So why did that happen? Because people had greater incentives, greater reasons to embrace voluntary cooperation. They could see benefits through commerce. They could see benefits through scientific collaboration. And we live in an increasingly interconnected world. It's amazing the extent to which, for instance, the components of our computer chips are manufactured in Taiwan, for instance. So if something happens in Taiwan, that's going to adversely affect all of us and everything that we do with our devices every single day. So my hope is that kind of interconnectedness, as well as a general rise in material comfort among human beings, will lead more people to recognize, oh, we don't want to break all of these chains of cooperation. That would be incredibly foolhardy, and it would undermine everything that we would possibly want to accomplish. So what percentage of human interactions could be undertaken through voluntary means? My hope is it will be an asymptotic convergence to 100%. And it's amazing that actually, in terms of this goal, people of radically different political persuasions align. If you think about, say, what Karl Marx wrote, the eventual goal of socialism is to achieve this state where the government withers away and there's universal abundance. What do libertarians want? Well, many libertarians, they want to minimize the role of coercion, whether they're minarchist or anarcho-capitalist libertarians, but it seems their end goal is very similar to Marx's end goal and very similar to transhumanists' end goal. So we can all align on the end goal of 100% voluntarism, even if we differ in perhaps the sequence of events by which to get there.
Yes, quite right and quite well said. This question is from David, and he wants to know, how does this party, the Transhumanist Party, compare and contrast to other parties in detail? How would you answer that one, especially third parties?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, David, I would encourage you to go to transhumanist-party.org/platform, because we have quite a detailed platform which essentially elaborates our policy positions to the same extent that the Republican Party or the Democratic Party would. So if you want the policy nuances, you will find them there. I would say, in terms of what we focus on, we are a policy-oriented and solutions-oriented political party. So as one of the graphics that I illustrated in my presentation states, we value policy over politics and over scoring political points against the other side. So I think one major difference is that the Republicans and Democrats, and I say this by way of, let's say, educating our audience, so I'm not telling anybody to vote a certain way, but to give you a contrast of what I consider to be the approaches. The Republicans and Democrats like to focus on what I call wedge issues or trench warfare issues, which are issues that really rile people up, really polarize them. People have very strong views one way or the other, but the issues are constructed in such a way that for the vast majority of people, they will have little relevance to their everyday lives. So the entire purpose of really exploiting those issues in a political campaign is for those issues to serve as tribal signifiers, so to speak. Are you part of the red tribe or are you part of the blue tribe? And we in the Transhumanist Party very conscientiously steer clear of the wedge issues, because we want to look at the longer term. These issues were not always at the top of political discourse, and they're not always going to be. Some of these issues do point to legitimate problems or conflicts of interests within our society, and we want to be constructive about how we address them. We want to see how could science and technology and applied reason lead to win-win solutions. There are some other contrasts that I could make with minor political parties. So, for instance, libertarianism is a very well-defined political ideology that essentially posits a certain desired relationship or lack thereof between the individual and the government. The Transhumanist Party tries to be more of a big tent in that we have members all across that spectrum. Some who think no government is the best way, some people who are socialists and want, say, significant government funding of transhumanist projects. Whether or not they're socialists, they might want that significant government funding. And again, if it's only a discussion about the means, then it's a legitimate question within our organization. To what extent should government be involved? How are we different from, say, the Green Party? Well, the Green Party, I think, might share certain concerns about improving the environment, improving the well-being of other life forms. There's some affinity between that and, for instance, David Pearce's transhumanist philosophy of abolitionism, the abolition of suffering. But the Green Party tends to be focused on a lot more conventional means. So instead of using science and technology to overcome these problems, they talk about maybe polluting less or using fewer resources. And generally, transhumanists would say that's not enough to solve those issues.
Gennady, thank you. I have a video that I want to bring up, and it's important to note that some of our members, and certainly many people who will be watching the recording, may have no idea what transhumanism is and may have a bit of an idea of what humanism is. And with that in mind, I think it's important to show this video, and it will very accurately describe and perhaps educate people on what really transhumanism is. So let's roll the video, and this will explain transhumanism.
Every aspect of our lives has been reshaped by technology, from the way we get around, the way we seek information, and the way we communicate. It's easy to think that if only our technology advances enough, we'll finally be satisfied. The fact is, we remain shackled by our primitive Darwinian brains. Humanity, for whatever progress we have made, is the result of an unguided, natural, 3.8 billion year long experiment of chemistry. Evolution is the process that has made you what you are, but it is not far-seeing. It does not and cannot consider the future, make decisions about where we ought to go, how we ought to be. Passing on genes is the only objective. But as thinking human beings, we care about far more than that. Consciousness means that we have the capacity to experience the world, to reflect upon, and, most importantly, to shape it. And so, what begins as humanism, our most sympathetic understanding and treatment of human nature, becomes transhumanism, the drive to fundamentally revolutionize what it means to be human by way of technological advancements. Changing human nature might be the most dangerous idea in all of human history, or perhaps the most liberating. Generally speaking, transhumanist thought does two things. First, it considers current trends to see how future technologies will develop and how they might affect us. Second, it calls for the use of current and upcoming technology to bring about beneficial societal change. We'll examine three central areas of transhumanist thought: super longevity, super intelligence, and super well-being. dubbed the 3 Supers because of their extraordinary transformative potential. So let's begin with a thought experiment to get your intuitions flowing. Consider this. An evil organization creates an airborne virus. It infects you and the entire human race. As a result, 100,000 people are dying every day. Within 30 years, 1 in 7, 1 billion people, will have died because of the virus. Now, how much money should world leaders put into research to develop an antidote? How high on a list of global priorities would you rate this? There is no denying the situation would be dire. Most people would demand immediate action. But hey, this is just a thought experiment, right? Not quite. 100,000 people really do die every day from diseases caused by aging. But no one treats aging as a global priority. So what explains this double standard? Are we simply resigned to death by aging? Aubrey de Grey, an expert in research on aging, argues that our priorities are fundamentally skewed and that we must start thinking seriously about preventing the huge number of deaths due to aging, the greatest cause of fatal diseases in the Western world. The goal of this strand of transhumanism is super longevity. Today, we have the minds and the equipment to begin developing technologies to combat aging. Unfortunately, we lack the will and the financial support to do so. Most of us are so accustomed to the idea of growing old that aging seems like just a fact of life. If modern medicine is supposed to keep us alive and healthy for as long as possible, then the anti-aging movement takes medicine to its logical conclusion. It's what happens when, as long as possible, means as long as we want. But what would a world without aging look like? How would we manage the huge population growth? And who would own the technologies that make it possible? These are huge questions, but we only have time to raise them. We'll investigate them in depth in future videos. Let's move on to the next area of transhumanist thinking. Every year, computers are getting more powerful. What used to fill up a room now fits in our pockets. More crucially, the time it takes for computer power to double is also getting shorter. At the outset of computing, the doubling process took 18 months, and this interval appears to be getting smaller. Plot this on a graph, and it's not a straight line, but an exponential upward curve. We need only project into the future to see that there is a point at which this line is practically vertical. A moment in human history referred to as the technological singularity. The futurist thinker Ray Kurzweil postulates that as these technologies develop, we will likely edit our bodies in order to integrate with computers more and more. This concept should be familiar. We're already in a symbiotic relationship with technology. You can send your thoughts at incredible speeds to recipients on the other side of the planet, find your precise location using satellites, and access the world's repository of recorded human knowledge with the device you carry with you at all times. And all of this was unthinkable 20 years ago. Out of this predicted computer capability explosion may eventually come artificial intelligence, a simulated consciousness in silicon. Given the rate at which an AI will be able to improve itself, it will quickly become capable of thought with precision, speed, and intelligence presently inconceivable to the human mind. If Kurzweil is right, and we end up integrating ourselves with technology, we could be in private contact with this AI whenever we choose. The result of this is that we effectively merge with this AI, and its abilities become our own. This would propel the human race into a period of super-intelligence. But perhaps, as some argue, no non-biological computer could ever become conscious. Or what if, as every other dystopian science fiction plot goes, this AI's goals differ from our own? And what does our increasing reliance on computers mean for our future? Super longevity and superintelligence are all well and good, but only insofar as they make us happier, more fulfilled, more content. Let's look at the last section, which deals with the issue of well-being. Imagine you're soon to be a parent. Your doctor informs you that, if you wanted, you could choose certain features of your child's biology. You could choose how genetically prone to depression they will be, their levels of anxiety, jealousy, anger, and even their pain threshold. Would you choose a high likelihood of chronic depression, an intolerably low pain threshold? How about panic attacks and anxiety? Probably not. The last major branch of transhumanism, spearheaded by philosopher David Pearce, aims to investigate and phase out suffering. He argues that, ultimately, all our conscious states, our feelings, moods, and emotions are all an expression of our brain chemistry. For Pearce, it is clear that natural selection hasn't designed us to be happy, it's designed us to be good at surviving and passing on genes. A species that is permanently anxious and discontented will have a higher motivation to watch out for predators and take precautions for survival. But in today's world, these emotions are vicious. Our biology has barely changed in 200,000 years, which means that whilst culture and society has arguably made progress, we are still those same aggressive, jealous, anxious, savannah-dwelling hunter-gatherers. This is why Pearce argues that if we ever hope to increase the well-being of our species, we will have to edit our genes. Minimizing our suffering, and the suffering of those we care about, is a crucial part of what drives us. Hence, so-called abolitionists argue that we start using modern technologies to do exactly that: minimize and eventually abolish suffering, ushering in an era of so-called super well-being. At present, every child is a roll of the genetic dice. Pearce argues that the least we can do is load the dice in our favour to create happier, healthier, longer-living humans. But might our compassion, curiosity, and pursuit of knowledge become secondary to our hedonism? If we're all content, why visit the stars? And isn't suffering sometimes a good thing? These are the three key areas of transhumanist thought, and we've only begun to scratch the surface. The three supers, super longevity, super intelligence, and super well-being, might radically change human history if, or when, they are realised. One of the main issues facing transhumanist ideals is that they are seen as far-fetched, or perceived as just science fiction. But this is a big mistake. We are already transhuman. We're living longer, integrating more with technology, and emphasizing quality of life. We're in the process of redesigning what it is to be human, only the effects are still so subtle and so slow that it doesn't look like much. But these changes will come faster and faster, and it's only wise to be an active, informed participant in the next stage of human development. Thanks for watching.
I think this video does a great job in encapsulating many of the aspirations of transhumanism. I want to draw your attention to one of the concluding remarks that was made, that we are already transhuman. And this dovetails with the campaign that the U.S. Transhumanist Party spearheaded in 2019 called the I Am Transhuman campaign, where we had a hashtag called I Am Transhuman, and we asked various members of the Transhumanist Party to speak about how they are already transhuman, how technology and their aspirations already enable them to be living in this era where we are pushing the boundaries of human potential. So please look up hashtag I Am Transhuman. There are 2 video compilations that are out already, and we always welcome more contributions. So if you are of a mind to put together a 1-minute video talking about why you are transhuman, please let us know.
Great, great. You know, I was having a conversation earlier in live stream. I am transhuman. I have glasses. I have cavities filled. I have a tooth, your baby tooth. Where is it? Right here. See that hole? I'm not proud of it, but we had a speaker at Perpetual Life who had 3 teeth that he regrew. He regrew using a stem cell protocol regrew his teeth, and I'm meeting with him in September at the RadFest and hoping that he's going to be able to help me to fix this hole in my mouth. I saw the dentists, I saw the people, and they said, oh, well, you can use this thing that will make you look much prettier. And this is how you do it. You drill down this tooth and you drill down that tooth, 2 perfectly good teeth, and then you make a fake tooth there. I don't want a fake tooth. I want my real tooth back. And that's what I intend to do. And hopefully in the next year or two, I'll have another I have another tooth grown. I've been told by several people that since I'm a public speaker, I shouldn't have this hole in my mouth. Quite frankly, it's going to be a badge of honor when I can grow my tooth back, and that's where we're going with that. We are all transhumanists. When people look at the transhumanist movement, some people are taking shots at it. Well, they're perhaps afraid of what the future holds in store. And that's always the case, though, isn't it? In history, people fear what they don't understand. And when people really understand transhumanism, I think they will embrace it. When you see a person without a leg, but they have a mechanical leg attachment attached, that person can walk. That person is transhuman. And no one should stand in the way of that person getting a perfectly good transhuman leg.
Essentially stating that this is an intriguing idea for an incremental reform to the Medicare program to enable it to be more aligned with the goals of our movement. And indeed, if hospice is being funded right now, then funding cryonics would be a better use of those resources.
I think you talk to the right congressmen and the right senators, you could get that passed. Gennady, I mean, if you're willing to work on it a little bit, just go to your congressman or senator in Nevada, right? I think you're surprised how they react. You make the argument, it's cheaper than hospice. Hospice is guaranteed death. Nobody survives, and it's a complete waste. You might as well just stab them in the heart instead of paying for hospice,
Okay.
I mean,
I know, Peter, I know exactly what you're saying. I don't know that I'd stab anybody, but I appreciate your point on this. You certainly bring it to dramatic conclusion. We have a question from Lewis, and then we're going to have one from Karen live. But Lewis has the question, do you think our world would be closer to conquering death if people like Alexander Bogdanov came out on top of their feuds in the past?
Yes, that's an interesting question, Luis. And for those who don't know, Alexander Bogdanov was an early Soviet scientist who focused on life extension through what he considered to be the best medically available pathway at the time, which was blood transfusions. But unfortunately, in 1928, he died because he essentially did a blood transfusion between himself and a student who was infected with a deadly disease, and he saved the life of that student, but the procedure killed him. So that was an unfortunate loss to humanity because he could have continued pursuing that research. And I don't know if he could have reversed biological aging in the late 1920s or the 1930s, but he could have gotten the science to be further along. And perhaps with those kinds of scientific accomplishments, maybe even the Soviet regime might have taken a different trajectory. Instead of becoming very militaristic, it might have become more of, let's say, a science-based power. So Luis mentioned that Bogdanov had certain power struggles with the people who did come out on top in the Soviet regime, who were, let's say, not friends of human longevity generally, given how many lives they ended prematurely. But what if Bogdanov had been in charge? Well, maybe it would have been more of a scientifically oriented kind of government, and it might have, to some extent, precipitated greater advancement, and we might be a few decades further along toward indefinite life extension.
Thank you. Thank you, Gennady. Karen has a question. Karen, you can ask live.
Supposing I wanted to meet other transhumanists in Tucson, Arizona, or anyone else at this meeting, or any other transhumanists wanted to get together, is do you have a process where you can put local people together so we could form a local transhumanist group?
Well, we do have some Facebook pages for state level transhumanist parties, and there is one for Arizona called the Official Arizona Transhumanist Party Group. It's run by David Shoemaker, who is also a dedicated cryonicist. So if you can find a Facebook page, my recommendation—
You don't do Facebook. What if I do zero social media. What if you just, I refuse to join Facebook. I think I won't go into that. But anyway, is there a way you can put people together so we can meet up?
So let me address that if I could, Gennady. At Perpetual Life, we're always looking to arrange meetups and have groups get together. Karen, you are the one in your community that should be the leader of such a meetup. And I would recommend maybe meeting up first with a couple of social media people so that you can find those people. The idea, of course, is to meet in person in your community so that you can have face-to-face conversations before and after presentations like this in your community. But at such a meeting, you could also have in-person people come and speak. You're in a great location. There are many people who are longevity enthusiasts where you are, and to be able to find them and to connect them and to be able to meet with them in person is really a great idea. I hope that we can talk something about that when we get together in person, and maybe we can create your meetup and help you to create something that where it can be at your house or it can be at a restaurant. You can share a meal, and it's definitely something that needs to happen, not just in your town in Arizona. I won't say where you are. I know where you are, but that's for you to say.
I don't care, Tucson.
Tucson or Phoenix, or the meetup. I know that you would drive to Phoenix if there was a meetup there, but there should be one in Tucson as well. I was thinking that there should be one in every major city, but also in local communities. And this is something that, Gennady, it might be a good idea for you and I to talk. It's going to be so important for us to get together in person. I hope that you can make it to RadFest and we can do that. But even if we don't do it in person, you and I love social media and technology, and we can talk however and whenever on this subject. But
hopefully, Gennady, if you do come to RadFest, please come to Teens and 20s also.
Yes, I would be happy to.
For them to meet you.
Yeah, Karen, I'm going to speak with Gennady actually at the after party here. Gennady's going to stay with us a bit, and I've got some great ideas for you there, Gennady, and actually for everyone in our Zoom meeting here. But keeping in mind that we are recording this event, and for those people who are in the recording, I know that you've appreciated all that Gennady has said. And I just want to thank you again, Gennady, for what a wonderful presentation, for some real meat and potatoes, not just icing on the cake, but some real in-depth content. We do appreciate that. And I personally appreciate all that you're doing for the Immortalist movement, for the extreme longevity movement. And I know you, like we sleep when we have to, and the rest of the time we enjoy doing the work we need to be able to ensure longevity for all.
Yes, thank you very much, Neal. I'm honored
one
by
more
those
question,
good words.
Neal. Hey, Neal.
Okay,
one more
sure. One last question we're going to close out with, and whoever it was, go ahead and jump right on.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me, Gennady?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Vladimir. I'm coming from the Cosmism point of view. I love your movement. I love transhumanisms, but it's always puzzling me. I never understood why you guys stuck with the biological hardware, because eventually the humanity and the post-humanity will end up in a digital world, in a synthetic reality, not the biological reality, because the limitation of the human body and the human brain is so limited. So we should move forward. If you remember what the Nikolai Fyodorov mentioned long time ago, that should be the radiant humanity, which will evolve after many generations of the humanities, which will be absorbing the energy from the sun directly. So it's not going to be the human bodies. It's going to be very different bodies. So it will be no bodies, actually. It will be a new reality. So my question is, why is it transhumanism? Is it totally ignoring this final destination, kind of a stuck in the middle?
Well, so let me just quickly, let me help you with this one, Gennady, and I'm going to let you finish up with it, but we'll take turns if you don't mind. He is actually the prophet of our church. You probably know that, but we are not ignoring that at all. You know, in the transhumanism, in the transhumanist future, in the future of humanity, the idea of copying ourselves and making digital copies of ourselves and being non-human, but rather completely transhumanist, that is an option for everyone. I look forward to making a digital copy of myself and uploading myself to do the Ray Kurzweilian singularity. And I believe that's coming very quickly, much more quickly than expected. His new book, The Singularity, is nearer. Well, I think it's nearer than Ray thinks. And the opportunity to do this is something that I certainly will seize upon. But there are transhumanists that want a transhuman body, a biological future. And so it's not something that's being ignored, I think. But Gennady, perhaps you could speak to that better.
Yes, so I think this is one of those questions of means that I discussed, except we're not talking about political means in this situation. We're talking about more technological means, and different people have different ideas about the trajectories that various technologies will take, and for instance, which ones will come sooner. I tend to think that biological rejuvenation will come sooner than digital uploading that reliably preserves the identity of the individual. Because when we're talking about an upload that continues to be you, we don't want a destructive upload. We don't want an upload that just makes a copy. We want an upload that essentially perpetuates this conscious experience of being you. So there would have to be some sort of gradual, stepwise integration of your brain with a digital substrate. Now, that's hard to do, in my view, because it is really challenging to understand how the human brain works. Neuroscience is just beginning to make forays into that. Whereas reversing the damage that is caused by biological aging, the processes involved in biological aging, is more straightforward from an engineering perspective. That is my view. But I understand others have different opinions about how quickly those various trajectories are advancing. But it's also a question of the diversity of future sentient entities, because I don't think we're going to be in a world where everybody makes the same choices. Just as today there are Amish people who choose to live with a certain level of technological advancement. They even selectively embrace certain 20th and 21st century technologies, but they limit themselves from certain other approaches. So I think there will be a spectrum along which different people will choose different interventions for purposes of increasing their longevity. And some people may gravitate more toward digital substrates. Other people may want just enhanced versions of their current physical bodies, which are more resilient against disease, where the biological aging has been reversed, which can run faster and jump higher and not break as many bones because the bones are made of extraordinarily durable material. There could be people who differ in aesthetics as well. Some people who choose a very deliberate cyborg aesthetic where it's obvious that they've merged with technology. Other people who might prefer to conceal the technology, just like people who wear pacemakers today obviously don't have any external sign that they have a pacemaker, or a lot of people who have hearing aids choose a fairly minimal aesthetic so that most other people, unless they look fairly closely, don't notice that they have hearing aids. So I think there will be a diversity of aesthetic preferences that will guide that as well. And we might say in the year 2200, if we visit some sort of subculture of humanity, find people who look remarkably like us, except, maybe they are us. But we could also visit another subculture where people look very different because they've made different choices. And yes, some might be in digital substrates. So I don't think there is a difference of core aspirations here. It's a question of what are the means that are approximately available to us to preserve our individual existences as us.
You're an excellent speaker. One little things you mentioned about the uploading of yourself, but it's not going to be yourself. Yeah, it's a question of identity. Yeah, I certainly agree with you. But I don't want to be myself for uploading. If you're talking about the super intelligence, I want to be super intelligence. I don't want to be myself. I don't want to be a super being. If you remember Friedrich Nietzsche, so he was probably the first philosopher who was thinking about something beyond the humanity. You remember his one of the remarkable book, Beyond the Good and Evil. So when you're talking about the digital worlds, you're going to be beyond the good and evil. You're going to be in a very different reality, and there will be no society at all. So this will be totally something different, and the transhumanism should start to think about this, because this is the final destination. That's where we're going to be end up. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, Vladimir. What I look at my cell phone. So I've got a cell phone, and I can connect to Google, and I've got the world's encyclopedias at a fingertip. That's where we are. But imagine now connecting your brain to the internet, so that you have a connection to the vast storehouses of information and knowledge that we have. This is very close. You want to be super intelligent, and you deserve to be. And being able to, rather than have to look at your phone and connect with your phone, having a direct connection to the World Wide Web, to the internet, to all of the information that you can get through Google.
Yeah, but it's yesterday technology. It's yesterday.
Yeah. Yesterday is today. Tomorrow we'll be there, and I hope to be there with you and be able to interface with you.
Well, so, I'm amazed. I'm so amazed about the new technology. I hope you guys know about the ChatGPT. This is a truly artificial intelligence, and it's revealing themselves to us. And now we can see that we are just so powerless, and this is a super intelligence right in front of us right now. And
I don't like the idea that I don't like the statement that we are powerless to ChatGPT or powerless to AI. I rather consider us merging with this technology rather than suggest that we are going to be powerless to this. I think that you will become extremely powerful as you merge with this technology. And I don't want to cut off Gennady, though. He is so much more eloquent than I am.
Yes. So as far as ChatGPT goes, it is impressive in many respects, and I have used it myself, but I still consider it a tool, a complement to our abilities as humans. And it still has many limitations that we humans do not. And the best outputs, including in terms of creativity, but certainly in terms of factual knowledge and factual communication, come when humans in an agentic way use these systems, but also check the output of these systems, deploy their own unique insights and expertise and creative qualities to make sure that the products of these systems are both accurate and uplifting and, of course, fulfilling of whatever purposes one wants to fulfill. But as an example of the limitations of ChatGPT, I tried to get ChatGPT to pretend to be a human, pretending to be an AI, pretending to be a human in order to pass the Turing test. And I tried this many times with ChatGPT, and every time it gave answers along the lines of, as a large language model, or unlike human beings, I do not have a body, except I was explicitly telling it to pretend to be a human.
Well, they have a legal obligation. So it's not just what they want to say. That's what the programmers has an obligation to say, just in order to avoid any legal problems.
Sure. But that also speaks to the point that we are not powerless before it. We do have it in our power to design these AI systems and also to figure out what are beneficial uses for these AI systems. And some uses will help us enhance our humanity, as Neal was pointing out. Other uses may not be as beneficial. I would not want autonomous killing machines, for example. And the US Transhumanist Party supports the campaign to ban killer robots, for example. So we shouldn't have AI systems like that, but we should have AI systems that help us to create art, to create music, to create written works, to create videos in the not too distant future. We should have AI systems that give us ideas to explore. As I mentioned, drug discovery, for example. An AI system isn't going to take you all the way from millions of possible drug candidates to one that actually works, but it can narrow the search for the needle in the proverbial haystack by really reducing the haystack to something much more manageable. So these systems, they're not supposed to replace us, and we shouldn't take a back seat to them. We should find those abilities that we have that are complementary to what those systems can do, and then work in symbiosis with them. By the way, Tom Ross speaks about that every day. So if you're interested in exploring these issues, please follow the Tom Ross campaign, and you can find him at tomross.com/2024.html. You can also find him on a variety of our social media.
Right.
Gennady, I have to say amen to your idea of banning killer robots. You know, there's a great deal of things coming in the future, and it's so heartening to hear you speak to that. Thank you for that. And I appreciate your comments. Vladimir, stay with us into the Zoom after party, and we can continue this conversation. As you know, we are recording this event, and I have a few more things that I must address. So I'd like for us all to thank Gennady. And if we were in person, we'd be giving you a huge applause. You're getting an applause from all of the Zoomers who are muted. Stay muted, Zoomers. We're not quite out of the meeting. But yes, thank you, Gennady. What a fabulous presentation. This will be seen by many people, and the recording will go on in perpetuity. Next month, we have our next service, which will be August 24th. Want to invite you to be here with us August 24th. We are waiting for our next incredible speaker to confirm. So mark your calendars for August 24th. It'll be again 6 p.m. for the Zoom party, 7 p.m. for the live stream, and then join the Zoom after party after the live stream. Join us now as I would like to recite our creed, the creed of perpetual life. We believe that all of life is sacred and that we have been given this one life to make unlimited. We believe in our Creator's divine plan for all of humanity to have infinite lifespans in perfect health and eternal joy, rendering death to be optional. By following our gospel, we achieve eternal life, creating a heaven here on earth. We follow Nikolai Fedorov, who taught that the transcendence of the Creator will only be solved when humanity, in our unified efforts, become an instrument of universal resuscitation, when the divine word becomes our divine action. And we follow Arthur C. Clarke, who said, the only way to discover the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. And so we enter each day energized in spirit and empowered by the words of our prophets to live in joy, serving our Creator and all of mankind forever and ever. If you are curious about cryonics, you can find wonderful resources. Simply Google them, or feel free to contact me, and I'll get you more information about cryonic suspension. If you'd like to give a donation, we certainly appreciate that. We have a PayPal access on our website at perpetual.life, www.perpetual.life, and it's the donations that you give us that help us to make our presentations longer, that help us to sustain the Church of Perpetual Life. If this is your first time joining us at Perpetual Life, I'd like to invite you to join our email list. Several times a month, we have a newsletter that comes out with the information that you need to stay healthy and to be healthier, the cutting edge science technology breakthroughs. And as they come, I get them to our members. If you'd like to join our membership and get the newsletter, please let me know what your email is. You can contact me through the perpetual.life website. You can reach me at stopoldage@aol.com. You can call me, and all of that information is public. It's easy to find me. So we hope that you have super longevity and that you may live a longer and healthier life. Thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to seeing you in August.
It's called Forever Young. May the good Lord be with you down every road you roam. And may sunshine and happiness surround you when you're far from home. And may you grow to be proud, dignified and true. And do unto others as you'd have done to you. Be courageous and be brave, and in my heart you'll always stay. Forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young. May good fortune be with you, may your guiding light be strong. Build a stairway to heaven with a prince or a vagabond. And may you never love in vain. And in my heart you will remain. Forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young. Forever young. And when you finally fly away, I'll be hoping that I served you well. For all the wisdom of a lifetime, no one can ever tell. But whatever road you choose, I'm right behind you, win or lose. Forever young.